holding, in truth, at the bottom of Daf base Amud Aleph. However, the last line. However, I want to go a little bit back to Amar Rabba Baba Chana Amar B'Yechanan, because it's a good break in the discussion, so that we can go back and remind ourselves of what we've discussed yesterday in terms of deciding who the author of our Mishnah is, and then discussing whether or not this can fit with Rabbi Yehuda or not, as we will see. So the Gemara is going to have two versions of the discussion. Let me just explain. What is the Gemara? The Gemara is a record of discussions that took place in the academies of Bavel between the 3rd to the 5th century, approximately. That's basically what the Gemara is. And so Rav Ashi, who compiled the Gemara, he put together a record of all these discussions. However, he didn't do this on his own, obviously. He did it with the help of many others who shared with him what these discussions were. And sometimes there were different versions of how a discussion went. And so what's presented to us is first one version of the discussion, and afterwards, because that version is difficult to understand, we're presented with a different version of how that discussion went, which everything really fit. But now, before we start, we have something that we need to pick up with from yesterday, and that was Ezra's question, which I tried looking high and low for somebody to discuss it, but unfortunately I found nobody discussing it. That may just be a problem on my end, not because nobody does discuss it, but just because I haven't found anything. And so I called a friend. When Who Wants to Play a Millionaire? You get a lifeline. You can call a friend. So I called a friend from Lakewood, and I asked him my question, and what he said is what I intuitively thought would be the answer, but I was happy that he helped me, and he confirmed it. And that is that with regards to Tinus Esther, well, let me just remind everybody what the question was. The question was, we said that if Purim falls out on a Friday, then the people from the villages would come in a day earlier on Thursday, because that would be the day they would be anyway coming in to deal with their business, and because they would go to the Beis Din that was open then on the Mondays and the Thursdays. So therefore, since they were already in town, that's when they would read the Megillah. So Ezra pointed out that if they're coming in on Thursday, that would be Tanis Esther. And Tanis Esther is a fast day, which generally speaking, fast days are sad days. And the reading of the Megillah is really associated with Purim, which is a happy day and a happy activity. And seemingly mixing these two things together doesn't really seem appropriate. So I said, well, I would look into it. And so basically the answer that came back was that Tanis Esther is very unique among all the fasts, in that many people view it as a very, very lenient fast. And so I'm going to share with you from Shulchan Aruch for a second. Here you have over here. This is from Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch Arachaim 686. And here the Shulchan Aruch says that you fast on the 13th day of Adar, and if Purim fell out on Sunday, then you bring it early to the 5th day. And then the Ramah, the Haggah over here, this means the note. That's the comments of the Ramah, Ramesh Isalis, and he says the Tainus Zeh, this Tainus, meaning Tainus Esther, Eina Chayva, it's not an obligation, and Lachain, therefore, Yesh Lahokil Boy, one can be lenient if there's a need. Can go in, for example, Mubaris, if somebody is pregnant, or somebody who's breastfeeding, or even to somebody who's sick, but there's no danger. Even if a person has a pain in their eyes, if they're in a lot of pain, and they don't have to fast. They can repay it later on. There's this concept of, if you can't pay a fast by doing it on that day, you can always repay it and do it a different day. Aval Shah Briam, but everybody else who's healthy, La Yifarshum and Tzibor, they shouldn't separate themselves from the Tzibor. But what comes out of this is that this fast of Tainus Esther is it's not on the same level as all the other fasts with sadness and so on. It's really more of a fast that is associated with celebrating a miracle. Because if you remember, Yud Gimel is, hey, let me just explain for a minute. The fast of Esther actually didn't take place on Yud Gimel Adar. The fast of Esther took place from the 13th day of Nisan, which is when Achashverosh and Haman sent out their letters to everybody else to kill all the Jews, right? And the following year, on the 13th day of Adar, right? That's when they sent out these letters, and so that's when Mordechai and Esther had this whole back and forth about Esther going and asking for her people on behalf of her people to Achashverosh, and she sent back a message saying, okay, gather everybody together and fast, and I'll also fast. So when was that fast? That fast was from the 13th till the 16th. So that even went through on Pesach. On Pesach, the first night of Pesach, they were fasting. They were fasting because of the fast of Esther. When we fast today, we don't fast in the month of Nisan in general. We certainly don't fast on Pesach. And so when did we establish the fast of Esther? Well, the reasoning and the logic goes like this. Generally speaking, when the Jewish people went out into battle, the Jewish people would fast and ask Hashem for mercy that we should be successful in the battle. So since the 13th day of Adar was the day that the Jewish people went out to war, right, to fight all the people who had still come to try and kill them. So since they had gone out to war, therefore it's assumed that everybody fasted on the 13th day of Adar. That being the case, so we have established Tanis Esther on that day. But we know what happened on the 13th day of Adar. It was a day where we had miracles, where we won in an incredible way. And so therefore, the Tainus of Esther isn't such a sad day as we would apply to all other fast days, which are really associated with a calamity that happened to the Jewish people, whether it's Shiva Asar Tammuz or Tisha B'Av or even Shem Gedalia. These fasts are already these fasts are associated with terrible calamities that befell the Jewish people. Whereas Tanis Esther, it's really, we're celebrating a miracle. And that's why it's not such a contradiction to read the Megillah at that time. So I'm not sure if that's a satisfying answer, but that's what I've got for you.
Rabbi, it's not a satisfying answer.
Okay.
Because they didn't know, because the Jews at that time didn't know what was going to happen to them. Okay. I mean, the fact of the matter is Hashem decreed all these things to happen to them because of their waywardness. In terms of going out to war, the people are going out to war at the time when Hashem is telling them that this is what they have to do, and so they fast. But but I think in the back of their minds, they know that Hashem is with them, and so therefore they'll be victorious. There's a completely different mindset between what was happening, for Purim, the fast of Esther, versus going out to fight a war.
So, in the chronology of the events, this war is taking place after Haman was already killed. Okay, Haman was already hung, and his 10 sons were already hung before the war. Okay, and so therefore the decree had already been annulled, and Achashverosh had already sent out a new decree that all Jews can stand up to defend themselves. So they had seen that Hashem was now on their side, and Mordechai was now placed over Haman's house, and now everybody knew that they had a queen in the house of the king that was Jewish, that was that was there. So seemingly, by the time the 13th day of Adar came around, they were in a much better position, in a much better position than they were prior. And I would argue that they went out knowing that they were going to be victorious. And in fact, as the Megillah describes, many of the non-Jewish people converted to Judaism because Mordechai, the fear of Mordechai had spread all over to everybody. So their leader, the leader of the Jewish people at that time, had really reached a new level. And I feel that they weren't really in a time of great sorrow at the time, but they were in a position of strength and pride, knowing that through that tshuva that they had done, that Hashem had accepted their tshuva, and they were saved.
When was Haman hung?
So Haman would have been.
What's the date that they give?
So it seems if the Suda,
second day Pesach.
Right, exactly. The second day, I was just about to say that. Yeah, if we follow that on the third day of the fasting, which was the second day Pesach, that's when Esther made the second Suda, and that's when she told Achashverosh about Haman, and Achashverosh says to hang him, and then they hung him. Right, because he had just put up a tree to hang Mordechai on, and they hung him. So on that day, that would have been the second day of Pesach. That was almost a full year before the 13th day of Adar. Okay, this is Nisan before the Yud Gimel Adar came around.
Okay.
So it seems that like they were in a much better position.
Okay.
But again, it doesn't.
Esther has nothing to do with the fast they did before the war.
Right.
Esther is only to commemorate the 3 days of fasting that Esther had decreed. So,
right.
As a matter of fact, what's interesting about the 13th day of Adar is that for every other day, the Gemara finds a pasuk or something that turns to it, except for the 13th of Adar. They don't have any support for 13th of Adar. And the Gemara just says, well, it's there. For that reason alone, they kept the 13th of Adar to read the Megillah without any support. Because that's the day they figured was the day that was supposed to be the Churban, and that's when they should definitely read the Megillah.
Okay.
Rabbi, can I ask you? Is it good to be born on Zayin on Pesach, on the second day of Pesach?
Of course, good.
Or is it bad?
It's excellent. It's excellent to be born on Pesach. Pesach is a time of miracles, a time of redemption. It's Zman Chirasenu, and the second day of Pesach is when they brought the Korban Omer. A very special day.
Okay, that's the day I was born. I just asked.
So there you go. Mazel tov. Okay. Now, I'm going to start from Amar Rabba Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. So Rabba Bachana said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, this is on Daf Beis, Amud Aleph. Let me just see how far down it is.
3 lines from the bottom.
3 lines from... No, that's the Ikad Amri. I'm going to the first one. It's 3 lines down from the big lines. Is that what you said?
No.
Okay.
So I add the other one.
Right, 3 lines down from the big lines, from the very big line.
I don't see it. I see Rab Shemen.
No, further down. Amar Rabbi, it's further down from Rab Shemen.
Where the lines get completely
Well,
wide.
Bar Yitzchak.
Amar Rabba Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan.
I don't see it. Is it after Shmuel Bar Yitzchak?
Yes, after that.
After that, okay. Shmuel Bar Nachmani.
Keep going.
Keep going. Oh, so you did go. That's page 2-3 already. Okay.
You got it?
Not yet, but I'll find it.
Okay.
Next page. Again, Rav Shemen.
Keep going.
In the Hebrew.
Rabba Bachana.
Got it. That's it. That's the one. Okay. Says the Gemara as follows. Amar Rabba Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Rabba Bachana said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Zu Divrei Rabbi Akiva Stimta. This ruling of our Mishnah that says that we can read the Megillah, not just on the 14th and the 15th, but on the extra days mentioned in the Mishnah. This is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, the anonymous one, meaning that Rabbi, when he put together the Mishnah, there were certain Mishnayos that he would bring an opinion without stating the name. So this case is a case of an anonymous Mishnah that is, the author is Rabbi Akiva. How do we know this? The Darish, because Rabbi Akiva is the one who derives from Zman, Zmanam, and Zmanehem. That since the pasuk says Bizmanehem, when we talk about the Jewish people celebrating Purim and the things that are associated with Purim, like reading the Megillah and on all the mitzvahs, it says Bizmanehem, in their times. And Bizmanehem, we explained, it could have said Zman, but it didn't. It could have said Zmanam, but it didn't. It said Zmanehem. It teaches us three things. It teaches us time, which means the 14th and the 15th, their time, which means the ones who have to do it on the 14th cannot do it on the 15th, and the ones who do it on the 15th cannot do it on the 14th, and the Zmanehem, right, which is the longer form of saying their times, teaches us that there are also additional days that we can add. So who's the author? Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Baba Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan that the view of the Chachamim was that that one can only read the Megillah in its proper time, which is the 14th and the 15th. So they don't hold of this drasha and of learning out from Zmanehem these three things, and they say that you can only read it on the 14th and the 15th. Now, there's no distinction in this teaching from Rabbi Yechanan between during when the Jewish people are living on the land and when we're establishing the month according to the sighting of the moon, and the way things are today when we don't have those things, right? There's no distinction between those two. So, Frank the Gemara, Meisvei, I'm going to ask an objection to this teaching of Rabbi Yechanan, right? Rabbi Yehuda, Mosai. Rabbi Yehuda says, when are the villagers allowed to read? On these extra days, only when the years are fixed properly by the Besdin, who would do it al pi hariyah, through the witnesses who would come and testify that they saw the moon. V'Yisrael shurin al mason, and the Jewish people would reside on their own lands. That is when it is possible to read it days earlier. But nowadays, when there's no Beis Hamikdash and we are exiled, since people look to this day, the day that they read the Megillah, to remind themselves when Pesach will fall out. Today is the 14th. That means 15 days left in Adar, and then 15 days in Nisan. So because they're going to come to such a calculation, therefore, that's why you can only read the Megillah in its proper time on the 14th or the 15th. Because if you're living in a walled city, you'll know that the day you're reading the Megillah is the 15th. If you're living outside of a walled city, you're living in a regular place, then from the 14th, you'll know how to calculate when Pesach is. If I were, at this point in time, to establish that you could read it earlier, you might come and make a mistake in the calculation and then end up eating chametz on Pesach, because yes, the first days you'd get right, but the last days you'd get wrong because you've started to make Pesach earlier, right? So therefore we say, and remember, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, they would send out messengers, they would send out shluchim to come and tell everybody when Rosh Chodesh Nisan was, and therefore that's how they would determine when Pesach was. It was going to be 15 days from Rosh Chodesh, 14 days from Rosh Chodesh. So now, following this that we quoted in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, now we analyze it and see how this does not fit with Rabbi Yechanan taught us. Rabbi Yehuda, this statement of Rabbi Yehuda, making a difference between when the Beis Hamikdash stood and when it didn't stand, right? Alibid the man, who does he go according to? In other words, is it according to the view of Rabbi Akiva, who Rabbi Akiva says that what? That even today we can read it on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, and so on? Or is it the Chachamim who say you can't? So, if you want to say that Rabbi Yehuda goes in accordance with Rabbi Akiva, it doesn't work, because according to Rabbi Akiva, it's still permitted even bismanazeh, and Rabbi Yehuda tells us that this leniency does not apply today. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda can't go according to Rabbi Akiva. So therefore, surely we're going to have to say that Rabbi Yehuda, who says that today you cannot do it on these earlier days, but you can only do it on the 14th and 15th, has to be in accordance with the Rabbanan. But the problem is, however, what do we find with Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda was the one who made a distinction and said that while the Jewish people were living in the land of Israel, and it was during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, that they would be able to read it on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, yet the Chachamim, we know, they hold that you can never read it on any other day besides the 14th and the 15th. It makes no difference whether there's a Beis Hamikdash or not. Says the Gemara, Tiyufta de Rabbi Yechanan Tiyufta. So therefore, this is a refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Yechanan, where he tried to present the view of Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan. That is according to this version of how the discussion went. However, says the Gemara, sorry, someone's trying to get in. Says the Gemara, Ikeda Amri, some say that there's a different version of this discussion, and this version will work. This version does make sense. Rabbi Bachana said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan that this Mishnah that we just said with regards to allowing us to do it on the first day, second day, and the 11th, 12th, and 13th. This is according to the anonymous one, Rabbi Akiva, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva in this anonymous Mishnah. However, the rabbis say, Bisman hazeh, in nowadays, since we look at this day, the day when the Megillah is read, in order to be able to figure out when Pesach is. Therefore, one can only read the Megillah in its proper time on the 14th and the 15th, which means, according to this version, what Rabbi Baba Chanas is saying in the name of Rabbi Yechanan is that Rabbi Akiva says you can always read it. The Rabbanan, they're the ones who qualify and say it's not at all times. They agree with Rabbi Akiva with regards to in the time of the Beis Hamikdash when they would figure out when Pesach is based on the sighting of the new moon of Nisan. However, today, since we don't have that because the calendar is fixed, so the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Akiva and say you can only read it in this time. But if that's the case, then it all fits well. And therefore, in this version, the continuation of the discussion goes as follows. Tanya na mehachi, there's also been taught a baraisa that supports this idea. Rabbi Yehuda said, "A Masai, when a villager is allowed to read the Megillah earlier than the 14th, Bisman in a time, Shehashonim ketiknon v'Yisrael shruin alad moson. This is only during the period when the years are fixed properly by the Bezdin and the Jewish people reside in their land. But nowadays, since the people look to this day to be able to calculate Pesach, and so now we can only read the Megillah in its proper time, and this resolves the teaching of Rabbi Yechanan in terms of the two opinions, Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, right? So there's a dispute, and it doesn't contradict the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Rav Ashi. We said Rav Ashi is the guy who compiled the Gemara. So Rav Ashi has a problem. Rav Ashi kashyaled Rav Yehuda ad Rav Yehuda. Rav Ashi noted that there's a contradiction between the statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa that we mentioned above, right? That there's a distinction between in the time of the Beis Hamikdash when they were Mekadosh Iyar and nowadays, and a different statement of Rabbi Yehuda, which we read in the next Mishnah, Daf Hey. Now we move over to Daf Beis Amud Beis. Because of this contradiction, because of this problem, therefore Rabbi Ashi attributed the statement of the Brisa not to Rabbi Yehuda, but rather to Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda. What was the problem? What was the contradiction that Rabbi Ashi saw that he had a problem with, that he decided he has to change the author not to be Rabbi Yehuda, but had to be Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda? So he explains. Omi Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Bisman hazeh hoyel mistaklim ba. Did Rabbi Yehuda really say that as the Brisa quoted, that in the current day, since the people look at the day on which the Megillah is read, so that Ein Keren Eisa Ala Bizmana, that you can only read it in its time, meaning on the 14th and the 15th. Or Amino, I'm going to ask you a contradiction, right? We're going to contrast the statement with the opinion that Rabbi Yehuda says in the following Mishnah. It says, Omar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ei Mosai. Let me just explain for a second. There's Mishnayos and then there's Gemara. The Mishnayos, one Mishnah follows the other. In Gemara, you have the Mishnah, you analyze it with the Gemara, and then you move on to the next Mishnah. But if you think about it in terms of one Mishnah following the other, so when we read the next Mishnah on Daf Hey, it's an immediate continuation from the Mishnah that preceded it, which was our Mishnah. So when our Mishnah comes along and says that we can read it on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, the very next Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ei Mosai, when does everything that we mentioned in the first Mishnah apply? Meaning, when can the Megillah be read earlier than the 14th? So he says, qualifies it by saying, Mokaim shenichnasin b'sheni u'b'chamishi. This is only in a place where villagers would plan to go into town on Mondays and Thursdays, which means to say there was a special dispensation given to the people who followed this principle of having the Beis Din open on Monday and Thursday for everybody to come from other villages to be able to hear their cases. So if this was their practice to go in on Monday and Thursday, then the Mishnah that we mentioned applies to them. Avol Mokaim.
Rabbi,
Yes?
this Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, is that Rabbi Yehuda's son?
It seems like it, yes. I'm not sure. I think so, but I'll have to check. I don't want to. I'm not saying from a place of knowledge. I'm guesstimating, but I can find out. I think so, but I'm not sure. Okay. So I guess perhaps your question is how could he be arguing with his father?
No,
that-
I just want to know.
Okay.
I'm just curious.
Because that would be my next question. Okay. Because if Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is the son of Rabbi Yehuda, well, we'll see. It's not really a problem. As we'll see.
Didn't Rashi's grandsons argue with him?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm Rabbi Yehuda. No, but here's a different problem. Here you have a problem because the person who compiled the Mishnah was Rabbi Yehuda. But anyway, all right. I'm Rabbi Yehuda. So 1 second. Okay, but in a place where they do not enter the towns on Mondays and Thursdays, then Ein Keren Eisa Ela Bizmana. Then you can only read the Megillah at its proper at its proper date. So now, what does this imply? But at any rate, in a place where the villagers do enter the towns on Mondays and Thursdays, they may read the Megillah on days before the 14th, and seemingly since Rabbi Yehuda in his Mishnah does not, in other words, in the second Mishnah of this Masechta, he does not come along and qualify whether it's Bisman Hazeh or not. So therefore, the assumption is Vafilu Bisman Hazeh, that this concession applies even Bisman Hazeh, and so this would contradict the statement of the Brisa above in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it's only Bisman Hazeh that this leniency applies. You understand the question? The contradiction, and this was bothering Rav Ashi. Now, I must point out that the truth is, it shouldn't be such a problem. Why shouldn't it be such a problem? Because we could turn around and we could say that the Rabbi Yehuda who comes along and makes a distinction between Bisman Hazeh and in the time of the Beis Hamikdash could be just a loose further explaining the view of the Chachamim, not the view of Rabbi Akiva. This second Mishnah over here, where we have Rabbi Yehuda saying that what? That it's only in a place where they go in on Monday and Thursday, whereas in a place where they don't go in on Monday and Thursday, they cannot read it, and that applies even bisman hazeh. Well, that Mishnah is explaining Rabbi Akiva. But the other brisa, which we mentioned, which came along and said it's only bisman hazeh, but not in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, vice versa, the other way around, that it's only in the time of Beis Hamikdash that you were allowed to read on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, whereas not today. That would be explaining the Chachamim. That would be explaining the Chachamim's view. However, it seems that what happened over here, as we're about to see, is that Rav Ashi had in front of him two versions of the brisa, and one was the Gemara is going to say this, but one was stating it in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, and the other was in the name of Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda. So because of this problem, he felt more compelled to use the other version because we don't even have this problem. Okay, so we'll see. Right, the Gemara. So because of this problem, Rav Ashi attributed the statement in the brisa to Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda and not Rabbi Yehuda. Frank the Gemara, the Kasha le Rabbi Yehuda ad Rabbi Yehuda. Since he has a contradiction between the statement of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, so therefore he attributes the statement of the brisa to Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda. It doesn't make sense. You can't just come along and arbitrarily change names because something doesn't fit with somebody else, right? Again, as I've just mentioned, there is another way to interpret this. So the Gemara is basically asking, the question of the Gemara on Rav Ashi is, right, why are you so quick to just change who the author of the brisa is, because there seems to be a problem with this Mishnah and this brisa? There is an alternative way to interpret it. Don't run and try and change the author to Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda instead of Rabbi Yehuda just because of this problem. So therefore, the Gemara answers that there's a reason why since there was this uncomfortable reading, right, of the Mishnah and the brisa. So therefore, what happened is like this: Rav Ashi Shmiele, Rav Ashi had heard the Iyar the Tani law Rabbi Yehuda, that some people they taught this brisa in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. The Iyar the Tani law Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda. There were other people who taught this same brisa in the name of Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda. So both versions have a basis in the tradition. Since he had this seemingly contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, Amma, he said, it's man tana like Rabbi Yehuda lav dafka. Those who taught this brisa in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, it wasn't accurate. They're teaching this and they're reporting it inaccurately. But man tana like Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda, those who taught this brisa in the name of Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda, that's dafka. They are reporting it accurately, and that's why he chose to establish this brisa in the name of Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so far so good. We're going to move on. I'm going to move on to the next shtickle in the Mishnah. Okay, it says as follows. Oh, someone's trying to get in.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a sefer. It's called Who's Who in the Talmud.
Yes.
I just looked up Rabbi Yehuda. It says that he was an elder colleague of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he was the son of the famous Tana, Rabbi Yehuda bar Levi.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Okay. Thank you for that. Very helpful. Okay. So now, the next shtickle of the Gemara. The Mishnah states in a very plain matter of fact that when it comes to cities that are walled from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, they read on the 15th day of Adar. Now, the Mishnah doesn't bring any support for this idea that you're supposed to read it, that walls that were cities that were walled from the time of Yeshua ben Nun should read on the 15th day. So therefore the Gemara inquires, from where do we know this? Where is it alluded to that walled cities are going to read the Megillah on the 15th. Amar Rava, so Rava says, Amakra, because it says in the pasuk, Alkein haYehudim haprozim haYeshvim ba'arei haprozois. Therefore, the Jews of the unwalled places who dwell in unwalled cities, right, make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of Simcha. So now, it says a double expression over here. Number one, it says haYehudim haprozim, the Jews living in the unwalled cities, and then it says hayoshvim ba'arei haprozos, that dwell in unwalled cities. So it then goes on to say that they practice on the 14th day. It must be coming to exclude the people who are living in the walled cities. Now, since the verse specifies that in unwalled cities, Purim is celebrated on the 14th, so therefore this was where we learned that that what's implied is that the people who lived in the walled cities, they celebrated on the 15th day of Adar. The Gemara continues to ask, 1 second. Ve'ema prosim ba'arbasa. It's true. There's an extra expression over there that seems to underscore that the people in the unwalled cities should do it on the 14th day, but that doesn't tell me anything about the people who live in the walled cities, because perhaps we could say that the people in the unwalled cities should do it on the 14th. But mukafin, those people who lived in walled cities, klalu klaloi, they don't have to read it at all. They don't celebrate Purim at all. 1 second. For Lav Yisrael Nidhu, the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Are the people who lived in walled cities not Jews? How can you even suggest that they should not celebrate Purim? V'oid, and furthermore, Mahoidevad Kush Ksiv. In the Megillah, it says from Hoidevad Kush. So this is a bit of a taking from two verses. The beginning of the Megillah says, Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh, in the days of Achashverosh. Then it says Hamelech, that he was someone who ruled Mahoidevad Kush, right? And then at the end it says all the people who were living in the kingdom of Achashverosh, right, celebrated Purim, right, accepted to celebrate Purim. So therefore, that certainly had to include people who lived in walled cities. So let's do it inside. Furthermore, Mahoidevad Kush Ksiv, it says from Mahoidevad Kush. So therefore, that must include walled cities. So therefore, they certainly have to read the Megillah and celebrate Purim. The question is, how do we know it's the 15th? So, so perhaps we could say, right, that true, there's an extra emphasis that the people living in the unwalled cities should read it on the 14th, but maybe but maybe the people who are living inside the walled cities, they have a choice. They can do it either on the 14th or on the 15th. In other words, we're challenging the Mishnah. We keep challenging the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, as a matter of a fact, that they take it for granted that the days that the people who lived in the walled cities have to read it on the 15th. We're finding different possible ways of saying perhaps it's not only the 15th. So in order to reject this suggestion of maybe you could do it on the 14th or the 15th, the Gemara comes along and answers and says that the pasuk is precise. It says in the pasuk, I'm sorry, this is still part of the question. Like it says, that they should observe the 14th of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the month of the same each and every year. Obviously, this cannot apply to the places that are not walled, because we said clearly that they have to celebrate on the 14th. So when it says in the pasuk that they celebrate on the 14th and the 15th, maybe this is telling me that you could celebrate in cities that are walled on both days, on the 14th and the 15th. So, and for the Gemara, Ihav Kosev Eis Yom Arbasar V'Chamisha Asar, if it would have said the day of the 14th and the 15th without saying Ace twice, but only saying Ace once, right? So then Kida Amrat. Then I would agree, as you suggested, that maybe that you could read in the walled cities on both the 14th and the 15th. But hashta now, Tichsiv, it's written, it's Yom Arbasa, ve'es Yom Chamishasa. It says that the 14th day and the Ace, Chamishasa, the 15th day, Asa, Ace, comes along this word Ace, upostic, and it interposes between the 2 days, teaching me that they're not celebrated together. Hani ba'abarsa, v'hani b'chamishasa, teaches me that those celebrating it on the 14th, the people in the unwalled cities will celebrate it on the 14th, and the people celebrating on the 15th, people in the walled cities, they have to celebrate it on the 15th. Okay. Frank the Gemara, 1 second. Ve'ema, let us say, Razi Barbar say the people in the unwalled cities are on the 14th, but Mukafin, but the people who lived in the walled cities, Ibo Barbar Srei, Iboi B'Chamesrei, perhaps they could read it on either one that they choose. In other words, 1 second. Oh. Previously, the Gemara, just before the Gemara was trying to suggest that maybe the people living in the walled cities should celebrate the 14th and the 15th. 2 days. They should have a 2-day Yom Tov. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. It seems that they suggest, the Gemara was suggesting to have 2 days Yom Tov. So we knocked off that argument by saying that it separates the days out. Those celebrating on 1 day celebrate on 1 day, and those celebrating on the other day celebrate on the other day. So now it's only a 1-day Yom Tov, not a 2-day Yom Tov. So we're suggesting, well, if it's only a 1-day Yom Tov, perhaps we could still suggest that those people living in the walled cities can choose. It's up to them. If they want to do it on the 14th, they can do it on the 14th. If they want to do it on the 15th, they can do it on the 15th. The people living in the unwalled cities don't have a choice, but maybe the people living in the walled cities have a choice. Maybe Prazim Barbarse, Mukafin, Ibo Barbarse, Ibo B'Chamesrei. Perhaps the people living in the walled cities, they can choose which day they want to celebrate it on, whether the 14th or the 15th. And for the Gemara, Makra, it says in the Pasuk, Bismanehem, in their times. And we said one of the limudim, one of the things we learned from the word Bismanehem is that it teaches me that the time for this one, meaning the walled cities, is unlike the time for the other, which is the unwalled cities. And so therefore, it can only be one of the two. Since it's not the 14th, it has to be the 15th. Frank, the Gemara.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I've got a passage in the art scroll that says the 13th or the 15th.
Where's that?
Well, I'm in art scroll.
Next part.
2B2, and it's the Gemara on the second Gemara on the right side. But one could say that in walled cities, Purim is celebrated on the 13th of Adar. What basis exists for the assuming that walled cities celebrate Purim on the 15th as opposed to the 13th?
We're about to read that right now. That's where we're up to right now.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. So the Gemara suggests, as you just said, as you correctly suggested, we've only got a premise right now to be able to say that the people in the walled cities do not do it on the same day as the people in the unwalled cities. You still have not shown me clearly that it has to be the 15th. The aim of a place are maybe when we're talking about the walled cities that are walled from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, when do they read it? Not on the day that all the people in the unwalled city read it, but they can read it on the 13th. So therefore, what basis do we have for saying that the walled cities have to celebrate it on the 15th as opposed to the 13th? And for the Gemara, Keshushan, when we talk about walled cities, since there's only one date that is explicitly mentioned for unwalled cities, so therefore there's nothing that explicitly stated for the walled cities. So therefore we're going to presume that it's going to be like the date established for Shushan, which is the only other explicit date mentioned in the Megillah. So therefore we're going to presume it's Keshushan, like the same day that was given to the city of Shushan to celebrate, which is the 15th. And from here, that's where we derive it. That's the end of establishing that the walled cities read it on the 15th. We learn it out from Shushan that Yeah, so far so good. Yes, I see someone's hand up.
Yeah, I have a question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
In Bazman Hazeh, I mean, really Hazeh now,
Yes,
Asham,
yes.
the walled cities, a few, but cities such as Yerushalayim, etc., have geographically expanded. So, in practicality today, does everybody in Greater Yerushalayim listen to Megillah on the 15th, or is it contained within a limited area that would have been the case in the times of the Beis Hamikdash?
So it seems, and I can look in this into this further in halacha. It seems that it's only the places where they had walls in the time of Yeshua ben Nun. So if Yerushalayim was walled in the time of Yeshua ben Nun, so then they would read it on the 15th. But the places that today are called Yerushalayim, right, which can extend a lot further, not necessarily would they read it in Yerushalayim. And if I'm not mistaken, and I can go and verify this again, is that there are certain places where there's a doubt. And so therefore, what is suggested for those people is that they either go into a place where it's certainly Yerushalayim and then follow the 15th, or if they go to further places further out where it's definitely no question that these are not considered to be part of Yerushalayim, and then celebrate it on the 14th. But they shouldn't stay in their place where there's a doubt which one they belong to. On Purim, they should move into a place which gets them out of that doubt. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much, Rabbi. That makes absolute sense.
Right. Okay. Now the Gemara comes along and addresses a question that we mentioned that I mentioned at the beginning of the Masechta, but here the Gemara actually spells it out. Ashkech on Asiyah, we find that when regards to the celebrations of Purim that have to be done on the 14th or the 15th, they mention what? They mention that this is what they would do. But Zechira Minalan, from where do we know about the commemoration of the miracle, meaning the reading of the Megillah? Where does it say that it has to be on these days? So the Gemara answers, as I explained at the beginning, right? And the Gemara answers, Amakra, it says in the Pasuk, V'hayamim ha'eleh, and these days, Niskarim v'nasim, they are commemorated and they are celebrated. Iskash zechira l'asiyah. So by putting these words together, zechira and asiyah, we are equating one with the other. So just like the nasim, the celebrating, the actions that they do are on the 14th, so too the reading of the Megillah, which is the commemoration, the mentioning and of the whole story, is also on the 14th. Okay, so now we're going to get into an interesting discussion. The Mishnah said that which cities are going to read on the 15th. It's the walled cities, but not any old walled city. It has to be a walled city that was walled in the time of Yeshua ben Nun. However, the Gemara is going to now tell us that not everybody holds that way. We have at least one Tana who tells us there's another way to determine whether you should read it on the 15th or not. Masnisa Deloikai Tana, our Mishnah, which says that it's only the walled cities from the time of Rabbi Shimon ben Nun, does not accord with another Tana, the Tanya that it was taught in the Baraisa. Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says, all those cities that were surrounded by walls at the time of Achashverosh, they read the Megillah on the 15th. And that's a whole different story, because by the time of Achashverosh, which was many, many, many years later, there may be a lot more cities that have walls around them than the cities in the time of Yeshua, which took place centuries and centuries before. Maybe there were less cities. So the Gemara points out that our Mishnah doesn't go in accordance with this Tana. Okay, but the Gemara asks, my time in the Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, what is the reason of Rabbi Shua ben Karcha who says that it's determined by the time of Achashverosh? So he answers, Shushan, because we're saying a walled city should be like Shushan. Just like Shushan, which we know Shushan read on the 15th day, right? And they are a walled city, so too all other cities that are walled. So just like Shushan, it was walled in the time of Achashverosh, and we read on the 15th, so too, any city that was surrounded by wall at the time of Achashverosh, they also read on the 15th day of Adar. They read the Megillah on the 15th day of Adar. Okay? Sounds very logical, and it sounds very reasonable. But the Gemara says, 1 second, if you have such a good argument by Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, why does the Tana of our Mishnah not use Achashverosh as a way to determine which city is walled and which one is not? And for the Gemara answers, our Tana of the Mishnah received by his tradition a Gzer Shava. One of the principles of a Gzer Shava is you cannot just make it up. A Gzer Shava needs to be taught to you by tradition, by your teacher. Your teacher has to pass down to you what he learned from his teacher. So the Tana of our Mishnah has a Gzer Shava. Yalif, he learns out Prazi, a Gzer Shava from the word that speaks of unwalled towns here in Megillas Esther, and the unwalled towns that are spoken of in Pashas Dvarim. Ksivhach, it says over here, Kain HaYehudim HaProzim, that it is there for the Jews of the unwalled towns. Ksiv Hosam, and over there, where Moshe Rabbeinu is recounting to the Jewish people about their conquest as they go up towards Eretz Yisrael, and he's talking about all the victories that they had over all the different towns and villages and all the enemies of the Jewish people. So it says over there, Levad, this is besides Me'orei HaProzi Harbe Ma'od, a great number of unwalled towns that were also conquered in our journey towards Eretz Yisrael. So now, says the Gemara, this is the Gzer Shava that our Tana of Mishnah learns out. Ma lahalon. And Rashi is his girsa, he leaves out Mukefes Chayma because he holds that it doesn't belong here. So Ma lahalon mimos Yeshua ben Nun, just like over there, when it says the word prozi, right, which is unwalled, it's talking about from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. So too over here, Afkan. Yeshua ben Nun. It has to be the walled cities that are at the time of Yeshua ben Nun. Okay? So, Mara says, it makes sense why Rabbi Shua ben Karcha would not hold like our Tana and learn out this Gzer Shava. Why? The Lesle Prozi, because he doesn't hold of the Gzer Shava of Prozi. Why? Because he didn't receive this from his teachers. So therefore, he cannot agree to something that Rabbi Shua that our Tana of the Mishnah is saying is because he didn't receive it as a Kabbalah, right? However, our question is on the Tana of our Mishnah, Tana Didan, my time alone, Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Why doesn't he hold like Rabbi Shua ben Karcha? Okay. Frank the Gemara, what's your question? My Tana, what's the reason of our Tana? Isn't it obvious? We just said it. The Ho'islay Prozi, because he has a Gzer Shava. And the Gzer Shava is what tells him that it has to be from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, of Yeshua ben Nun, not in the time of Achashverosh. Says the Gemara, no. You don't understand my question. This is what I was trying to ask. I'm asking that in our Mishnah, right, we said that what? That the people of the walled towns, right, they read it on the 15th. You also said in the Mishnah, right, that it has to be from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. So the question we're asking now of our Tana is Ela Shushan, in the town of Shushan, of the command. So who are they going to follow in terms of their custom? Because remember, our Mishnah says that it has to be a walled city from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, but Shushan was only walled from the time of Achashverosh. So, like Prozim, it's not going to be like the unwalled cities, right? But like Mukafin, and it's not going to be like the walled cities because Shushan is different from the walled cities, from the unwalled cities, in that it is celebrated on the 15th, but it's different from the walled cities because it doesn't go all the way back to Yeshua ben Nun. It only goes back to Achashverosh, right? So the question is, so who's so some of Farshim explain that the question of the Gemara is, nowadays, what should Shushan do? In the time of the Megillah, so the Megillah says they didn't have a choice, right? In the time of the Megillah, right, when they, in other words, in the first year, what happened was they were still fighting. And since they were still fighting, they couldn't celebrate till the next day, till the 15th. But that's a technical problem. So therefore, then they celebrated on the 15th. But maybe for all future generations, maybe Shushan should be like the unwalled cities, and they should celebrate on the 15th, on the 14th. Why?
Rabbi.
Because it hasn't been walled since the time of Yeshua ben Nun. That's what
Rabbi.
we're all asking with regards to the Tana of our Mishnah.
Rabbi. Yeah.
Answers.
Can I bring in a piece of historical?
Yes.
They say that the Shushan itself did not exist until basically a few years before, or a few years after Achashverosh took control of the country. In fact, it was built up because archaeological digs have shown or found where it actually is.
Right.
And that place didn't exist before. I mean, in fact, the actual capital of the city was moved to this place that we call Shushan during the time of Achashverosh.
Right.
And so it couldn't have existed in the time of Yoshua ben Nun.
Which makes the question even stronger.
But that's what I'm saying.
Right. Absolutely. So therefore, the question we're asking is, according to our Tana, so what should they do, or who do they follow? So Amar Rava Amrila Kedi, Rava said, and some say it was Kedi who said this. Shiny Shushan. Shushan is a special case. Why? It's different. Because the miracle was performed over there. Because the miracle took place over there, they had the extra day to continue killing out the enemies of the Jewish people. So therefore, a special exception was made to Shushan to celebrate the extra miracle that took place for them on the 15th. And that's why, in other words, they had the extra day on the 14th to fight, and therefore the 15th day was the day that they celebrated Purim. And that became established for all generations that Shushan should be the exception to the rule, but everybody else, every other city, only if it was walled in the time of Yeshua would they celebrate it. And we will stop here. Evra, have a wonderful day.
Rabbi,
Thank you, Rabbi.
where did they discuss the fact that if they did it according to the time of Achashverosh, then Yerushalayim would be embarrassed? Because at the time of Achashverosh, maybe, because of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, Yerushalayim would not have been a walled city.
I'm not sure. I will look it up, and I will hopefully come back to you tomorrow. As Hashem.
I see something like that also in the Koran Talmud. It says the main reason that the status of a city is walled or unwalled depends upon the status, the time of Yeshua, is to show honor to Eretz Yisrael. Because in the time of Achashverosh, the cities of Eretz Yisrael were all unwalled cities, yet it would not be fitting to consider them as having the status of unwalled towns for the purpose of reading the Megillah.
But the
And
spies, when they went into Israel, they said they were walled cities.
Right. So the question is, why do we go back to Yoshua ben Nun's time. Why even go back then? I mean, perhaps it should be at the time that all of this happened.
Mhm.
So, and from what I had learned, it was the reason why we did it is because we wanted to show kavod to Yerushalayim, which happens to be the capital city of the state of Israel, and that's why we did it back then. And so they had to come up with a reason, which could be, a little bit stretched as to why it was done at the time of Yoshua ben Nun. As logically, it should be at the time of when the event occurred.
Right. So I will leave it to look into this. Unfortunately, my Sfarim haven't yet come. They were supposed to arrive today. So when they come, I'll have more resources. All my Sfarim are in storage, so I'm dealing with limited resources. But I will look into it. All right.
Okay.
There's a footnote
Thank
here.
you, Rabbi. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Rabbi,
Take care.
go ahead.